Hey, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming again tonight, for spending your evening with us. We know it's a Tuesday evening. You probably have a lot of things to do, but you're here, so thank you. And before I invite our guests, I'm just going to quickly share what we do at Immigrant Techies Alberta, why we hang out. So I'll be sharing my screen. Okay, so Immigrant Techies Alberta is a meetup group that, okay, where do I move this? Yeah. We're a tech enthusiast group for newcomers to Canada who are exploring, trying to find their place in the innovation ecosystem in Alberta. And this was a gap that was found when I started attending events in Calgary, Alberta generally, and saw that there was a lot of good things happening and there were a lot of people missing out on that just because people were not aware that we have a lot more going for us in Calgary, in Alberta, than oil and gas. And for me personally, I have some friends who are trying to come to Canada and are saying, we're not coming to Alberta. We heard your glory days are over. And so we're trying to rewrite that narrative and create a space for people who might not know what resources are available or who might feel too intimidated to approach just because they don't know where to start. So the whole point of this group is to just really hang out, bring in people from the community, demystify concepts, and create a bridge. So we represent a bridge into Alberta's innovation community, a space to explore and ask all the dumb questions. I like asking a lot of dumb questions. So I think that makes people feel at ease to ask theirs as well. And so this creates a lot of opportunities for networking, for mentorship. People have made connections through which they got their jobs by coming to this meetup. And we try to curate emerging content or anything helpful event resources that we feel can help people in their career advancement. So our goal is to provide community and support for immigrant professionals who want to pivot into tech as careers or even as startups. And tonight we have Dr. David Finch from Montreal University. He's a professor and senior fellow of the Institute for Community and Prosperity from Montreal University. So I'll just take it away, David, and tell us more about yourself.
Well, I won't talk about myself, but
we'd like to learn a little about you, sure.
For the opportunity, and I'd just like to introduce a colleague of mine, Dexter Lamb. So we've been collaborating now for a couple of years in regards to this area of competencies and really the broader opportunity around evolving the learning system in the city of Calgary and how that can advance not only individuals, but obviously the ecosystem in the city as a whole. So we'll talk today. I'm going to talk about one of the pilot projects that he has evolved from this overarching study that's called Learning City. And we're looking at how to, again, evolve Calgary to become a world-leading city in the area of learning. So I'm just going to share my screen. All right. I'll just let that go 1 second. How's that? Does that look good?
Yes, it does.
Fantastic. Perfect. So as it says here, one of the areas that I focus on is to the right is an organization called the City X Lab. And the City X Lab is looking at how all the different aspects of a city interacts together for the purpose of talent attraction, retention, and development. A big part of the work that we're doing with Calgary Economic Development is finally based on the vision that a world-leading city today is not necessarily uniquely tied to infrastructure. It's certainly not tied to access to natural resources any longer, but it's tied to the ability to attract, retain, and mobilize talent. And that is the project that the City of Calgary has funded for us to look at. How can we look at evolving the talent system more efficiently? So I'll just run a narrative here. And, obviously at this stage, cities and communities are facing a fair amount of disruption. It could be social disruption. It's obviously a disruption tied to ecological, environmental changes, advancements of technology, and how all these interact together to change the fundamental nature of talent and the fundamental nature of how certain types of competencies create value in the marketplace. Now, I like to look at this particular individual as really one of the critical elements as individuals we need to reflect on, because what the evolution in the last 100 years has done, where you shift from a life expectancy of 49 years in 1900 to between, our children today will live between the ages of 84 to 110 years. And more relevantly, what they'll have is a 60-year career. And this idea of a 60-year career, it fundamentally reframes the nature of learning. It also fundamentally reframes the core competencies we need to stay relevant in a fast-paced, constantly changing environment. And my argument, and the argument that we've made over the last several years, is not only at the individual level, but the individual level, at the ecosystem, and at the city level, we need to look at building more adaptive systems, and systems that have embedded capacity to be able to change and adapt quickly. And frankly, for the last 18 months, that has been something we've been dealing with daily as we have to evolve our work systems, our families, our social lives, and everything, how it fits together, because we're evolving and changing in real time. The reality is, few of us were conditioned or learned through formal learning how to adapt, how to have an embedded flexibility to in fact embrace the unknown. So part of this research is looking at this idea of obviously competencies. So we're all basically familiar with the principle of competencies. It's as it notes here, the combination of aptitude, ability, knowledge, and skills to complete a job or a task. And the historical dimension of this is really, really important. So many of us probably grew up in an environment, and certainly historically in an environment, in which the perception was what we call job-specific competencies or task-specific competencies were perceived as the most valuable in an economic context, meaning that if I've got a certain coding skill, or I've got a certain aptitude or certification to complete a task as an accountant or as a lawyer, I have a very specialized competencies. It's perceived as exceptionally valuable, and therefore, based on supply-demand dynamics, that's important. And that historically has always been the case, especially if we go back 100 years, when people are dealing in 30-year careers, and where you're not dealing with the advancements that we're dealing with in regards to social changes, technological changes, and so forth. Many of the competencies that you could learn in a job context, in fact, were relatively stable over your lifespan, over your professional lifespan. The second competency I like to refer to as enabling competencies. It's also referred to in areas such as soft skills, transferable skills, and so forth. The reason I'd like to frame this as enabling competencies, because of the foundational role they play in being able to create the capacity to adapt. So enabling competencies, and I'll unpack those momentarily, are the foundation for an individual to be able to, in fact, adopt job-specific competencies. So what's important to recognize today is, and you certainly in this group where you're focused in the technology sector, you're used to speed of change, right? The average job-specific competency today, and certainly this is a much shorter lifespan in this space, is about 6 years, right? So I tell my students, when they learn something in first or second year university, if it's a job-specific skill set, I teach marketing and strategy, there's a significant chance whatever they may have learned could have been out of date by the time they graduate. All right. That's the challenge and the speed of change we're dealing with, right? This is why stepping back and looking at what we call enabling competencies, which in fact have a significantly extended lifespan, and they provide the capacity to, in fact, adopt, be able to mobilize job-specific competencies, adapt them and learn them, and then drop them and move on to the next one. This idea of perpetual change of job-specific competencies is really important as you move forward as professionals. So what we wanted to do was explore this idea of enabling competencies. Enabling competencies, soft skills, certainly is not new. But what we wanted to understand was the universal value of them. So what this particular slide represents a study we conducted with Calgary Economic Development, in which we looked at some of the dominant competency frameworks across different professional groups. So, literally policing, social work, engineering, accounting, finance. We looked at and mapped their competency frameworks and the terminologies and skills they've defined as valuable. So again, marketing, sales, social work, what do they have in common? Well, what we found through the study of these frameworks globally is about 66% of all competencies embedded on competency frameworks, regardless of whether it's engineering or social work or nursing, 66% are common. There are common competencies, and this is what we've identified as the 25 enabling competencies, because again, it suggests an engineer has far more in common with a social worker than they'd ever lead to guess. But what's the system structured like? Our system, educationally and from a learning system, is still inverted. It puts significant resources and energy, starting in secondary, right through post-secondary, around the primacy of job-specific competencies. So this idea of understanding the value of enabling competencies is really kind of a critical dimension. So let me unpack, where this comes into play from an employment perspective. The model we've adopted was just simply looking at talent as a supply-demand marketplace. And it's composed of three different nodes, three different significant stakeholders in that marketplace. First of all, there's individual talent. So it's the people with the competencies that they can supply to the market. And there's talent seekers who are looking to purchase or borrow that competency. So it's paid or volunteer, the competency use. So there's a dimension that happens there. Talent developers, those range from formal to informal talent developers that support the development of competencies in the marketplace. So that would be, for example, universities or university professional like myself. In Calgary alone, as an example, there's about 155,000 individual organizations that are talent seekers. They are people that are consciously, actively purchasing access to competencies. There are about 10,000 organizations that are developing talent in the marketplace. And there's about 1.3 million individuals that are contributing to the pool of talent in the marketplace. So where am I taking this? I'm taking this from the kind of irrational nature of the market right now. And I'll start with our pig friend here. Our pig friend takes us back to an agrarian history in which we used to barter. We used to simply trade a pig for a cow, a pig for some agricultural product. And if I had two partners that wanted to exchange a pig for wheat, we had a trade. The challenge with that system is it's not portable. It also assumes that you find two partners that have products or services that they would like to exchange. So about 5,000 years ago, the concept of a currency was created. And that was the ability to create some portability and minimize the friction of trading of products and services in a marketplace. And in the European context, as we look at Europe, they've in fact, introduced a common currency for 17 different nations under the euro. in which they identified the ability to trade amongst partners in the European Union, the Eurozone, in fact, accelerated the ability to trade products and services and minimize friction. So our hypothesis and our project we've been working on with Calgary Economic Development in the city over the last 6 months is recognizing we've got a market problem. And the market problem is simply this. Though 66% of the organizations and sectors in our study identified common competencies, there were 25 competencies as part of that study. They were, in fact, about 200 different synonyms that were used to describe those competencies. So how does that matter? Well, that matters quite simply. An employer is describing a competency they're pursuing in a job description or recruitment advertisement one way. The learning outcome of a course you may have taken at a university, college, or some other learning institution may describe the learning outcome another way. And then you're sitting in the middle as the individual, the talent, trying to figure out how, in fact, you translate the competencies you possess, verbal communications, oral communications, so presentation skills. What exactly is the competency that's relevant and how valuable it is? This is where we've proposed a model, and we've been piloting it over the last 6 months, in which we call the Competencies for Life. The Competencies for Life is a very simple principle. The principle is simply this. It's a competency framework for the city of Calgary, in which 92% of the businesses in the city of Calgary are small businesses that their talent pool, to a great extent, is local. So they're not necessarily recruiting globally. They're not necessarily recruiting out of market. Their talent pool is local. Our position is simply this. If we can get the 10,000 talent developers who are actively defining learning outcomes and developing competencies, and if we can get the talent seekers, those people that are purchasing these competencies, and the individuals who are the people that possess the talent, to in fact align on a common currency. And that common currency is the competencies for life. The ability to have that common framework and common terminology, common measurement, will in fact accelerate and eliminate the friction from the marketplace by accelerating the ability to trade competencies. And it's simply based on this hypothesis or this premise. Premise is this, is the riskiest decision you're ever going to make in life is the person you hire, right? And your job as an individual is to, in fact, minimize that risk. And the Competencies for Life allows us to create a common framework and a common set of competencies that, in fact, are measured, developed, and identified, in which when you say you have a certain competency, and in fact, it's verified, the employer, the talent seeker, will be also using that equivalent terminology, and the talent developer will also be using that common terminology. So there's a trading in the marketplace. And the last part of this I'll talk about before I defer it is the critical role of evidence in this entire marketplace. So the principle of competencies is based on the assumption that, in fact, I'm not just telling you I can do it. I'm in fact got evidence I can do it. And so what does the evidence look like in regards to the ability to demonstrate proof of competencies? Obviously, there's evidence of previous work. There's social references or types of social advocacy or social verification, personal and professional references, academic credentials are a form of evidence, professional credentials, performance evaluations, and awards. Those are the 6 main categories in which we create some form of evidence of competencies existing. And one of the challenges is the ability to weave these sources of evidence into a compelling narrative and story that in fact demonstrates to a potential job seeker that you possess the competencies and in fact have the verified evidence that you in fact have these competencies in place. So on that note, Wimi, I'll just kind of hand it over to you to discuss what we'd like to do next.
Sure, thank you, David. So I'm going to break us out, and we'll be discussing these questions here. I'll make the group as small as possible so that everybody has a chance to talk. And we'll have, let me check. We can have up to 5 minutes, or let's make it 6 minutes for discussion. So I'm creating 6 rooms.
So you want me to talk about the 3 questions?
Yeah, sure.
So
like what people will discuss. Yeah, please.
Yeah, so that I really want you to think about 3 things: is the reflection of the competencies you have today, and specifically reflecting on enabling competencies, because we have been conditioned to really think about this idea of job-specific competencies. The decade of research I've done in this area, it's fascinating how the enabling competencies always float to the top as the dominant criteria. So my question to you as you reflect on it, what are the enabling competencies you have today that are not tied specifically to your job, right? What's the evidence you have those enabling competencies? Again, problem-solving skills, communication skills, forms of literacy, right? What's the evidence you have of those? And I'm not talking, I can tell you I have it. In fact, what's the actual tangible evidence you have? And then the third component is, how do you embed that into your story, right? How have you embedded that evidence into your story to support that future, that talent seeker to in fact see the competencies you possess and the evidence you have?
Hi. Yeah, I just popped in. I'm just going to be popping around the room, so carry on.
Yeah, Rahila, she just answered the second question. I think for me, as I mentioned, the competency is the communication, because I believe like when you move from one country to another, from one place to another, the first thing that make your life easier is just when you have a good communication skills. You know how to reach your targets, and it will make your life easier. So the evidence for that from my life, that actually when I moved to Canada, I found myself in different communities, like looking for different groups that they have the same interest, and I was able to get along this kind of maybe a challenge for some other people. They can spend like months or maybe years without having this kind of this amount of connections or network in their new city that they moved on. Now what's for you, Chioma?
Okay, I'll say the evidence I have, same thing like the communication skill, because I've had over 4 to 5 years of customer service experience, both in the bank and the telecom industry. And it goes without saying, the skills you're able to harness in that field are good communication skills and patience, mostly patience, and ability to use positive languages. Those are skills I've been able to harness over time, and it's evident because the jobs I've been doing over the years entails that.
I think that the most challenging part is putting it in your story, right? That's what I find most challenging, being able to communicate what you have done to a prospective employer. Yeah, sorry for interrupting, Rahila. Please go on.
No, that's fine. That's actually, it is a really good point, especially when you're, switching across industries, is like I'm hoping to do. for my next career evolution, I suppose. So I guess what I picked and how it adds to my story, I would say, is that I'm able to analyze.
Communication was key in the sense that we had to not only just talk to our main contacts within the business, but also building that business case with CEOs, CFOs, and the IT department to ensure that all of them were aware of the risks and be able to mitigate it accordingly based on our research and findings. So that's kind of where I feel that would be, I guess, one of my enabling competencies.
Yeah, I'm just popping around the rooms, so please carry on.
No, that's a nice one there, Azil. And I guess the question then is there a way you could, I'm sorry about the noise, is there a way you could validate that evidence that you do have that? Or how would you validate that?
Yeah, I think for me personally, in regards to my transition into more data science, I think data says one part of the story, but being able to communicate that data into various audiences in regards to visualization, being able to share what exactly the data is showing to your team and your direct reports, but also been able to build that business case. And so I think presentations that you may have done, having a website or portfolio to kind of illustrate some of the work that you've done as well, I think would really go far for that.
Yeah, that's a really good one. So portfolio of previous projects that you've kind of worked on.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Where your previous work, any kind of work sample like that, it does provide evidence, I would say.
And all that. Okay, are we back in the main?
No.
Okay.
I just popped into.
Okay.
I'm just popping around the rooms.
Okay.
All right.
So as I was saying, if there's a team that embraces collaboration, appreciates and seeks feedback, they're likely to achieve their aim rather than working in silos. So if you find yourself in that kind of environment, especially those who are more techy, it's good that you develop that collaborative spirit, because that's what will make the team perform. In the agile environment we are, or where I work, it's about team performance now. So it is good that even if you don't have it, if you're introverted or you like working alone, or maybe you're a figures person or whatever, you should try to develop that competency, because I learned that my current job, that was what drew them to me during the interview, because they saw that I was a team player. I like collaboration. I like feedback. I told the story that I loved those things. So it's a competency that is in demand. So it's good to develop it and all that skill. So Tolu, that's what I wanted to add.
All right, thank you so much, Tayo, right? I hope I got it right.
Yes, got it.
Okay, so yeah, you've said it all, like collaboration is very important in today's work environment, and usually employers, like I've attended interviews where they are asking me to provide a situation or like a story of an example of how I collaborated with my team members and with other members of your.
Okay, welcome back, everyone. I hope we had a lot of good discussions. I was hopping around the rooms just to see what was going on, except one. I wasn't in your room, David, but I'm sure it went well there. Do you want to continue the presentation, David?
Yeah, no, I'd like to kind of discuss the maybe review the discussion that the different groups had, and this idea of reflection on competencies that you have or never thought of as a competency? And then how do you then identify pathways to have evidence of those competencies? And I would argue always tangible evidence. And then how do you embed that in your story? And Liv, if I could put you on the spot, because we just happened to be talking about this about 12 seconds ago, that this whole model, the whole assumption starts with the premise of understand your audience. I didn't really explicitly get into that, but it's a really, really, really important factor that very few of us reflect on. And Liv, so maybe do you want to just maybe kind of unpack what we were just talking about and the story you were just telling me?
Sure. I guess the way that I saw this was come from the perspective of a canvas. Like you have a blank canvas, and you have to have an understanding of, what are you trying to draw? What picture are you trying to paint, so that whoever it is that you're trying to attract will be interested in that picture. So again, your audience, understanding your audience. And so you can do it from a systematic perspective where, you break your canvas in different sections. And so you fill those sections with different, let's say, like, for example, I was looking at a software developer. They want to show their competencies. Okay, so you have GitHub, that's one section. You have maybe LinkedIn groups or other areas, meetup groups that you can then paint your picture with, paint your canvas with. So different brush strokes or different paints and whatnot. So at the end of the day, you want to create a picture that you find your audience would be attracted to. And so I thought sometimes if you're, depending on what you're trying to do, transitioning from one career to another, maybe you want to find an artist or somebody that's already done that and has found that the people that are attracted to that paint or that picture has done it already, so that you can then find out, not from scratch, but find out how they've done it and maybe guide it to what you want to achieve. So that way you're not starting from scratch. So I hope I made sense of it a bit, but that was the idea that I saw as like a canvas. It's an empty blank canvas. I want to paint a picture of my competencies. How do I do it? That's kind of...
And one of the challenges we have in today's environment, I'll just kind of extend the story, is many of the audience, especially in your space, they don't know what they want. And they don't know what the market's going to need in 2 or 3 years' time in regards to very job-specific competencies, coding expertise, what have you. And the analogy we use is the BlackBerry versus an Android or iPhone platform, right? So when you think about the BlackBerry, and what the book we wrote on this topic was with one of the original designers of the BlackBerry. The BlackBerry did one thing really well, right? What it didn't do well, right, is adapt. It had a fantastic keyboard, and when the iPhone was launched, literally the day of the iPhone being launched, the CEO of BlackBerry said, "Our killer app is our keyboard," right? It couldn't evolve. And let's look at the Android platform or the iOS platform. Steve Jobs had no idea when he launched 500 apps in 2007 what the iPhone was going to do in 2015 or what the market would need in 2020. It was actually irrelevant, right? The fundamental operating system and the hardware of an iPhone is your enabling competencies, right? Because what it does is allows you to then adapt and adopt new apps, new features, new benefits as the market evolves. Without that hardware platform and operating system, you're a BlackBerry, right? That's why employers are absolutely demanding the ability to have people that can adapt and evolve like an Android platform, an iOS platform, because they don't know what the market's going to need. And therefore, when they hire you, they have to hire something that can evolve and adapt with their business, right? As opposed to, I got a BlackBerry that's beautiful, but it's out of date and static. And hopefully that kind of frames this idea of the role of enabling competency. When we study this, you know what the number one competency from employers is? There's nothing to do with coding. There's nothing to do with strategy. You know what the number one employer demanded competency is? Take a wild guess.
Adapt to be able to adapt, no?
It's far, far basic, more basic than that. It's listening. They want people that can listen, because there's a whole bunch of precursors that say, if you can't do any of that good, listening, different forms of communication, work well with others, there's a series of different, again, enabling competencies that become the foundation of then being able to extract economic benefit out of a job specific competency. But if you don't have those foundational enabling competencies, I may have you for a short-term period of time because I can extract economic value from your job specific competency, but then I'm going to move on and find something else, right?
Something we find that I think newcomers find more challenging is in the translating of previous experiences and competences into the forms that is understandable in the new environment. So do you have any tips in that regard?
I think so. What I think things are evolving, because I think we're moving away from the traditional forms of credentials, right? The challenge with traditional forms of credential is, I was frankly telling all my students today, if you think your university degree is going to set you up, you're sadly mistaken, right? That piece of paper you have at best allows you to have a conversation, right? It is evidence of nothing. And that's shock therapy, because I started the conversation with them that said, by the way, 4-year university degree is 10,000 hours and $70,000 in Alberta. That's what a 4-year university degree is. And then I turn around and say, it's evidence of nothing. Because if it was evidence of something, 45% of the people with university degrees wouldn't be underemployed, right? Because it's not sufficient. It's a commodity, but similar to enabling competencies, it's foundational. What's important is, what else have you done? And in my world, and you might be able to extrapolate it, in this world, is my students, young people, they think of, oh, I'm only a waiter. I worked as a waitress. I worked as a hostess. They think that is just simply a means to an end. I got to pay tuition. I got to live my life. I was just a waiter. They do not reflect on the enormous value of that experience, right? Guess what a great waiter has to be? Number one skill of a great waiter or waitress: listening. Mm-hmm. Guess what they do? They care about people. They ask great questions, right? And they've learned that. So with 1,000 hours as a waiter or waitress, people toss overboard as one bullet on a CV. And I would argue what that is evidence of enormous range of enabling competencies that is buried and not being told as part of their story. I think in the world of especially new Canadians, you've got a wealth of experience and background, personal, professional, volunteer, otherwise, that has to be unpacked and weaved into your story, right? Because I don't think it's about a specific type of certification. Now, obviously, in certain fields, it is, like, we understand that, but in many areas, it's not.
Mm. And a lot of immigrant communities, we were raised to go after the degrees, like we get the degrees, we get the first degree, second degree, we aim for the third. So it's a huge mindset shift for a lot of us to say, my degree matters, but it's not what matters the most, because the mentality is that I do a degree that secures my job. Like, you choose what to study in school so that you can have job security. It's like that term doesn't even exist anymore, right?
Okay, exactly. And the degree is critical. So it's foundational. And I always say a degree is interesting because it's a legacy of a lazy employer, right? Because what does a degree historically have done? Is that evidence of any particular competency? Maybe in some fields it is, obviously, but often it's just used as a filtering tool. Mm-hmm. I've got 10,000 applications. In Alberta, I can immediately throw out 4,000 of those applications if I put university degree required, right? who am I losing those 4,000 that in fact may be more highly qualified for what I need because I've used a crude measure of a university degree, just as an example, as my criteria. I'm not saying it's not important. I think it's exceptionally important, right? Obviously, but it does not stand alone, right? Especially because many of our degrees in Canada, just as an example, we grant 250,000 degrees a year in Canada. 50,000 of those degrees are business degrees. So what I use as a common terminology is why you? What makes you unique? Google averages about 10,000 applications per job. So what's not going to make you unique is the 9,999 other applicants that also have a university degree in those applications. So what else do you have that makes you different and unique, right? And I would argue you have enormous, what we don't do very well is reflect on our background, because we've been conditioned, and I've been conditioned, university credential, degree matters. What we're not used to conditioning is thinking about relationships we've had, community work we've done, and then extracting evidence of it to mitigate the risk of a future investor or employer.
Does anyone else from any other breakout room want to share something from what was discussed? Tayo, how about from your breakout room? You want to share what you talked about?
Okay, all of us shared what we think our competencies are and how we have used them, or what stories we can tell with those competencies. So mine was collaboration and communication skills, team building. Excuse me. I can get people to work together. I use feedback. I solicit feedback. I ensure that I get to the heart of the users, the stakeholders, and I ensure that each team member knows that they should seek those as well. So how it's translated in the team was that no one wants to release their product except the team members have critiqued it. They have drilled holes into it, and it showed in our product. So it became our story that whatever the team produces hardly has issues, or not well thought out. You know that it's a well thought out product, and that when we are introduced it to the market or to the users, we still continue to solicit and raise more or new MVPs, most valuable product. So it became our story and our identity, and it made each team member to know that it's not an island. It has to seek other people's opinion.
Wow, that's beautifully said.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts, questions that anyone wants to share? You know, as Liv was describing the canvas earlier, then I remember that as part of Competencies for Life project, there's a concept of designing you. And the idea I have about that is seeing yourself as a product. You know, just like what Tayo was just describing. What do you do to a product before you release it to the market? You do your customer validation, you do market research. You want to know what's needed in there, and then design a product to fit that need. Successful products are no longer the engineer's creation. So engineers used to think of something like this must be cool, let's just create it. But then, right, these days, the customer has a lot of say. So there's a lot more competition. And the fact that product is cool doesn't mean it will sell, right? So we can apply that to our careers. The fact that it's cool to study something does not mean it will sell where you are. So we can apply the same concept of designing a product to designing your own career by looking at what the market needs and then building it.
If I could add on to that, you know, because you're all tech people. My background is product management. I always tell the story between, you know, the bookends of early linear product management, which looks shockingly like a 4-year university degree, right? It was very linear, very stage, and often insulated from customers, right? So the story I use is the development of the television took almost 50 years from concept to commercialization, right? Whereas apps are launched generally within 3 weeks to 3 months, right? And we all know they're terrible, but they are designed because they are co-created with your customer, right? You are in fact designing a product, beta testing it, getting feedback, refining it. That's the way you need to think of yourself. You need to go out and constantly be iterating and talking to your customer about upcoming features they're going to need, features that they currently don't like about you, that you will iterate and continue to refine, because it's the fail fast iteration model that is the current product management model, right?
Mhm.
That is you, right? And if you think about what you do professionally and you look in a mirror and say, I got to think about that, how that changes the mentality is, before you make a 2-year commitment on a product feature called, you know, a certain degree or a certain type of certification, you better be sure when you pop out in 2 years, there's still going to be market demand for that investment, right? That you've just made. What's the return on that investment? And you better be certain of it.
Mm. Wow, that was great. So if there isn't any other questions, I can't find anything in the chat. If I missed something, please unmute yourself and share. I don't think so. I don't think I missed anything.
I have
Actually,
a question.
oh, sure, go ahead.
Okay, sure.
All right, thank you. So I was also thinking, like, because I know, like, during interviews, employers want to ask situational questions, and I was also thinking, because I've seen cases where people request for, like, LinkedIn, what do you call it? Is it LinkedIn recommendation? So is that another way we can show competencies? Maybe, like, because it's, even for me, I feel it gives more credibility to our stories when there is something to back it up, other people giving you, like, credible proof of the commendation based on, like, the competencies you claim you are demonstrating. So my question is that also a very, like, an example of showing the proof?
Absolutely. So all my students, for example, they build LinkedIn profiles, and social verification through recommendations is how we verify their competencies and their hours. So it's very efficient, given the ubiquity of LinkedIn as an example. Remember the very nature of advocacy, because this is really important. Advocacy is not, you know, when you advocate for somebody, what are you doing? You, in fact, are putting yourself at risk, period. Right? So the research around advocacy says, hey, you know what? You'll say, you're great, I'm great. But the threshold of you putting yourself on the line to say somebody else is great is exceptionally high, right? Because the risk to you is enormous. And that could be about a job, or it could be about recommending a product to somebody, right? You might try a product and buy it because you got nothing to lose. But before you start telling 3 people to buy the same product, that threshold better be damn high, right? So that's why social verification through platforms like LinkedIn are incredibly important, because it extrapolates the legitimacy of others and allows you to borrow that legitimacy, because you're, in fact, that's what they're doing. They're putting themselves online for you. As a consumer of the product called you, I know that took a lot for that person to say, you know, Leave is a fantastic coder, or Leave is an incredible collaborator. That people don't do that half-heartedly, right? So please, that's the concept of evidence. Evidence then mitigates my risk as an employer, right? My biggest risk I'm going to make is hiring him or her or you. And so what can you do to mitigate that risk for me, right?
I'm thinking about that. I was just thinking, so can I possibly copy my LinkedIn recommendations into my cover letter or my resume? I'm just wondering,
They
you
probably
can't
start with
assume
your
that they will
LinkedIn.
check LinkedIn, right?
They probably start with your LinkedIn. Like, honestly, that's where I'm on LinkedIn. I'm sure you are too. I see a name. By the end of this call, I'm probably going to look 3 of you up, right? That's just the platform, right? That's how it's evolved. That's why remember, LinkedIn allows you to embed other artifacts, projects you've done, evidence of work you've done. That's obviously in the public domain. That's why it's fantastic as an actual universal hub. So it's not just a story, it's what I call an evidence-based story. So when you say you've done a project and I can click on it and see a copy of the report or a link to the project website, that changes everything.
Yeah, talking about LinkedIn, if you feel like dropping your profile in the chat, so it's just easy to click through, please do. Liv, I think you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, it was just really in line with what was asked, and just general really advice for those that are in a sort of transition careers, and how this sort of competencies really pertain to that, because you may not have all the competencies at that point because you're transitioning. So what is the best advice for creating, or at least creating depth in your competencies, or at least acquiring new competencies?
Step one, just on my perspective, is I think you'd be surprised on when you start reflecting on the competencies you have. Specifically, I'm going to focus on enabling competencies. This is where we are conditioned to downplay them, right? Because we've been conditioned of the primacy. Look at a university degree, college diplomas. They're all structured around primacy of job-specific competencies, right? There are very few. We all throw in our learning outcomes of university degrees or courses, communications, organization. There's no assessment of it, zero, right? But you know what? I'm handing you a degree in a professional area or a major, right? A major, by definition, is a job-specific area, right? So reflect on everything else you've done personally and professionally as forms of evidence of all those enabling competencies, and then amplify those, right? Amplify them, because that's what's being lost, I would argue, in that features and benefit argument. If you look at yourself as a product, they're not looking for the bells and whistles. They're looking for the basics, right? And you're not telling that story today. And I would argue, when you reflect on the last 30 years of life, you have enormous evidence of those competencies.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Okay, we are on the hour. If there is no other question or comment, thank you so very much, David. Thank you for spending your night here, like your evening with us. We truly appreciate it. I think Dexter left the call already. We're so grateful for his participation as well. I think he left a comment earlier in the chat about, I think it's about what Calgary Economic Development is doing through the City X Lab. Yeah, just check out those resources. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks very much, everyone. This is fantastic.
I appreciate it.
Appreciate the invitation. Have a good night.
You too.
Good night.
Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.